In this lesson, we'll learn how we can start to work with the components of our different objects inside of Maya. So once again, we're going to open up an existing scene file to illustrate this. So let's go to File, Open Scene, and if you take a look inside your Beginner's Guide to Maya project, inside the Scenes directory, you should see Lesson 07, Start. So go ahead and select that, open that up, and we have just a couple of very simple objects in our scene to kind of demonstrate a couple of the different geometry types that we have inside of Maya. So in one of my earlier lessons I had mentioned that when it comes to creating primitives, we have a couple of different types to choose from: NURBS primitives, polygon primitives, and so on and so forth. Now for now, we're just going to discuss the main differences between the NURBS and polygon objects. So you can see, starting kind of over here on this far right hand side, we have a couple of different polygon objects, and these I've just gone in and simply labeled very quickly. Now when it comes to polygon objects, these are essentially made up of what Maya calls a face. And you can see, looking at this polygon object right here, this polygon sphere, you can see it's pretty faceted. You can see a lot of the individual faces on this. So sometimes polygon objects have a tendency to not be very smooth. They tend to be a little bit more jagged and a little bit more rough in appearance. Now these polygon objects are made up of what Maya calls a face. And you can see these individual faces that make up our polygon object in here. And essentially a face is just a flat little component of our geometry, and these faces really are typically going to be 100% flat. Now we can take polygon objects and actually make them look a little bit smoother, as we can see over here. And the way that we do that is to actually add more faces into our geometry. So more of these faces means we have a little bit smaller detail, and more of these faces can make up a little bit smoother surface. So you can definitely see the difference here between the number of faces that we have. So if you want your polygon objects to be smoother, it's really just a matter of adding more geometry to this. Now, if you're going to be working with primitives, we can do this by just simply selecting our polygon object, and inside of our channel box, just simply select our input for that object, and we can adjust the number of subdivisions for the height and the width right from here. So if we wanted to, let's say, change our subdivisions to 5, I can just select both of these, hit 5 on my keyboard, and now we have 5 subdivisions around and 5 subdivisions down. So if we wanted to, we could continue to bump this up. The default value in Maya is going to be 20 subdivisions. We could kick this up really as high as we want, up to 30, 50, 60, and so on and so forth. And you'll notice that the higher this value goes, the smoother our object becomes, because we've added more and more of these little faces in here to make this surface more and more smooth. Now let's talk about actually moving and manipulating some of the objects or some of the components that make up any kind of an object. So let's start with this middle polygon object, and we'll talk about this and kind of some of the different components before we start to discuss this NURBS object type. So when it comes to polygons, we really have 3 main different types of components that we can work with. So a component you can really think of as just a building block for this entire surface. Now to access these components, the quickest way is to press and hold the right mouse button. So if I press and hold, you can see it pops up this little menu, and still pressing and holding the right key on my mouse, we can now start to come in and choose a few different component types to work with. So let's start with something like the vertex, which is over here at sort of this 9 o'clock position on this little circular menu. So go to vertex, and now let off my mouse button. Now you'll see that my object wireframe turns sort of a blue color. Now anytime you see this blue wireframe, that means that you are currently working in a component mode. Now if we are in a vertex mode, you can start to see these little pink, kind of purplish colored areas that are right at these intersection points. So what I can do is grab one of these vertexes, or these vertices, just grab that, and now I can use any of my manipulator features. So I can come in and grab something like the move tool, and now with that vertex selected, we can come in here and start to push that around. Now we can actually come in and select multiple vertices at the same time. So if we were to come in here and let's say just grab these 4, if we were to use a circular drag or just a marquee drag, you can come in and just simply select these. Now I had mentioned in one of my earlier lessons that you want to be really careful whenever you use any kind of a marquee selection. So if I click and drag, remember that Maya will not only select what you see currently, but it will also select anything that is behind my current selection. So what that means is if I click and drag to try to grab these 4 vertices, I'm probably going to wind up with a situation where I've now accidentally selected any vertices that were behind. So you want to be very, very careful when it comes to using any kind of a marquee selection. Just to be on the safe side, I typically find it to be a little bit easier and a little bit safer practice to just come in and grab these components one by one. We can grab these by pressing and holding the Shift key on our keyboard to add to our selection. So now I can come in, grab multiple vertices at the same time, and move these around. Now, we have another component type, which is called edges. Now, edges are these little blue lines that actually connect 2 or more vertices together. So if I right-click, go to Edge, I can now grab one of these edges and move those around. Again, I can Shift-select and add multiple edges to my selection. Again, probably want to avoid using your marquee select as much as possible, because you will accidentally wind up selecting some things behind here. So again, be very, very careful of that. So we can come in here, grab any of these edges, move these around and shuffle these around as we see necessary. We can also grab faces. Now faces are this entire flat area that we see. So again, if we right click, go down to face, which is down toward the 6 o'clock position, we can grab individual faces, again Shift select, and now we can move these, scale them, rotate them, really do anything that we want. Now if we want to go back to an object mode, what we need to do is right click and kind of up toward this 2 o'clock position, go up to object mode. And now you can see whenever I select my object, the wireframe turns sort of this green color again. That means I'm no longer in a component mode. Now I'm able to move this entire surface around. Alright, so vertices, edges, and faces. Those are the 3 main components that make up any kind of a polygon object. Now NURBS are a little bit different story. NURBS are not necessarily made up of these individual flat faces like a polygon object. NURBS are instead made up of really a mathematical curve. So NURBS objects tend to be very, very smooth and very rounded, very organic, but you can see they're very, very light on geometry compared to this much more dense polygon object and this NURBS object. When they're in a shaded mode, they look like they're pretty much at the same level of smoothness. But because a NURBS object doesn't have to rely on these individual flat faces, we can get much smoother, much more curved surfaces with much less geometry. Now with a NURBS, the actual components that make up this NURBS are a little bit different. So if I were to right-click on this NURBS object, you can see that we don't have the same vertices or edges or faces that we had previously on our polygon object. Instead, the main component type that you're going to work with is called a control vertex. Oftentimes you may hear these referred to as just a CV for short. Now a control vertex, once we enable that component mode, we can come in here and start to grab some of these little pink areas. And essentially these are just some of the points on these mathematical curves that make up this object. We can come in here and grab these individual CVs, start to move these around as we see fit. You may find it necessary or a little bit easier to maybe come into one of your orthographic views, maybe something like this front view. We can use that to quickly come in and maybe just grab entire rows of CVs, or maybe just a handful on both sides. And then you can very quickly jump back to your perspective view and move these around as you see fit. Again, whenever you're done working with your components, just simply right-click on your object, and up at this 2 o'clock position, go back to an object mode. Now select your object, and now we're no longer working with those components. Now we're back to moving our entire object around. Now what we've just gone through is a very, very simplified explanation of some of these different surface types and their components. Now if you do want to learn more about these, I would recommend viewing either our Introduction to Maya course or our Introduction to Modeling in Maya course, where we'll actually cover these in quite a bit more detail and let you understand the things that you can and cannot do with these different surface types and some of their different limitations, as well as some of the different benefits you can get from one surface type over the other. But for now, that's just a quick overview of some of the different surface types that we do have access to inside of Maya.